In this episode, the liquidity trap. Why profitable companies still run out of cash, you'll gain insights into. Why profitable companies can still run out of cash. How customer concentration and bad debt create hidden liquidity gaps. Why collections belong at the heart of financial management. How diversification, supplier strategy, and stress testing reduce liquidity risk. Why securing a payment date can transform collections. Why liquidity must be protected long before a crisis begins.
Pedro Eloy focuses on cash flow and working capital and explores with Sandro Figueiredo Pires a critical blind spot where profitable companies fail due to timing gaps between customer receipts and supplier payments. He argues that liquidity is often compromised by customer concentration and a lack of independence between sales and finance functions.
Business Masters series examines how organizations build, sustain, and renew competitive advantage by exploring leadership decisions, operating models, innovation strategies, and critical inflection points. Welcome to another episode of Business Masters, Behind the Decisions That Shape Successful Companies, a program produced by Pedro Eloy and Xinchin Ma, featuring original articles and conversations with CEOs, founders, corporate leaders, innovators, and industry experts on strategy, innovation, growth, and performance.
Before we dive in, if you enjoy this episode and would like to listen to future episodes, please remember to subscribe.
So today we're looking at a whole stack of case studies, some OECD reports, and the consulting frameworks of Sandro Figueiredo Pires. Our goal here is to figure out this terrifying paradox: how a business with booming sales and great margins can still go bankrupt just because they misunderstood the clock. Okay, let's unpack this problem hidden between customers and suppliers. Sandro's background is pretty unique because he didn't start in a traditional accounting firm. He actually began in the military and security sector.
Right, which means he approaches problems purely from a threat assessment perspective before he even looks at a ledger.
Exactly. And then he spent 11 years deep in financial functions, collections, liquidity, risk analysis. Plus, he has an academic background in financial law and public administration. So he is obsessed with this one specific vulnerability: what happens in the exact gap between a commercial promise being made and the moment the money actually hits the bank.
Because that gap creates, well, what we can call the illusion of balanced management. When a company looks at its customer inflows in a vacuum, everything looks healthy. And looking at supplier outflows in a vacuum, expenses seem totally manageable.
Yeah, it's like a relay race where you're only watching the individual runners and completely ignoring the baton. The customer team runs a great lap, the supplier team runs theirs, but the baton gets dropped in the transition zone because the timing is just completely misaligned.
And that mismatch creates a massive hidden financing requirement. You're issuing invoices, you're paying suppliers on time, but the cash itself is just delayed in the system.
And Sandro found this wasn't just a regional issue. He saw it across Spain, Angola, Germany, the UK. It's universal. I mean, the Bank for International Settlements, their 2026 study by Banerjee and colleagues, they noted that these highly interconnected supply chains naturally demand much larger credit lines and more working capital.
What's fascinating here is how quickly just a single major customer can turn that systemic vulnerability into a fatal crisis. There's this case of a German company that was acquired by a multinational, and they were heavily dependent on just one massive customer.
Which gives that customer near total commercial leverage.
Right, the leverage dictates the survival. So we see their payment terms gradually creeping up. It starts at 30 days, pushes to 60, stretches to 90, and eventually hits 120 days.
But logically, why would a management team ever agree to 120 days? You're doing the work and waiting a third of the year for the cash.
Well, because the revenue looks fantastic on the income statement, that commercial leverage completely blinds the business leaders to their real liquidity position. They assume that as long as the customer is reliable, the business is safe. But that revenue does not arrive fast enough to finance the daily operations required to serve that exact client.
So the moment that dominant client has a slight delay, the dependent company instantly defaults on its own obligations. So what does this all mean for the actual architecture of the business? Sandro uses this geometric framework he calls the liquidity triangle. Imagine you sell 100 units to a retailer. That side one, the customer relationship, looking perfectly fine. You bought the raw materials from a vendor. That S is side two, also looking fine.
But the third side is the actual movement of cash. You owe the vendor on Friday, but the retailer isn't paying until next month.
Exactly. The cash sits trapped right in the middle as inventory and accounts receivable. The first two sides are intact, but that third side is rapidly deteriorating. And for SMEs, this is literally a matter of survival. The OECD's 2026 scoreboard points out that sluggish SME credit growth weighs directly on firm liquidity, meaning SMEs don't have the internal reserves to bridge that gap when the third side breaks down.
Which logically brings us to the operational rule regarding customer concentration. Growth can actually become a massive liability. We see this in an Iberian integration case. A parent company had operations in Portugal and Spain. The Portuguese side integrated easily due to shared culture, but the Catalan business required severe intervention because of extreme customer concentration.
So what's the threshold there? When does it become too concentrated?
The rule of thumb is absolute. If one or two customers or suppliers represent more than 50% of your exposure, that side must be your immediate management priority. If you have both simultaneously, you are in severe risk. And the solution isn't to abandon major customers, but to reduce dependence by expanding internationally.
Right, which aligns with the mandate of Portugal's AICP, supporting SME internationalization with market intelligence so they can broaden those networks. But expanding internationally requires massive upfront capital. Family-owned businesses often struggle with the entrepreneurship side of that, finding commercial partners and bearing those market entry costs.
It does test short-term liquidity, absolutely, but diversification is the only way to reduce long-term risk.
And, even when companies think they're diversified, they usually aren't. Take the case of a business selling through 7 large retail chains. On paper, 7 distinct clients sounds like you're safe.
Right, until you realize those 7 chains represent 70 to 75% of the total revenue.
Exactly. I definitely push back on the idea that 7 is diversified. Your exposure is still enormous. Sandro's strategy was to renegotiate with just the top 3 clients out of the 7, using targeted commercial discounts to get faster payments, which neutralized half the exposure. And yes, the European Parliament and Council have 2011 rules establishing 60 days as the general B2B rule to protect creditors.
But the financial reality is that if you accept 120-day terms, you are acting as an unregulated bank for your clients, completely funding their operations.
Yeah, having 7 customers means nothing if you're financing all 7 out of your own pocket.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, once you stabilize the customer side, you have to rigorously audit where the cash leaves the business. Sandro categorizes suppliers into 3 groups based on risk. You have raw materials, institutional suppliers like water and electricity, and lateral suppliers for things like office materials or transport.
And the risk behaves very differently across those, right?
Yes. Transport seems like a lateral service, but if disruptions halt your delivery, it instantly acts like a raw material shortage. Everything just stops. In one distribution operation that had outsourced half its fleet, Sandro actually bought 2 trucks to consolidate operations.
Which is a fascinating shift in business strategy. He moved from pure asset ownership analysis to acquiring vital operational control. Buying those trucks meant buying direct control over a critical supply chain node, removing dependence on external logistics providers who could suddenly change their terms.
And that exact same principle applies to energy. Utilities are institutional suppliers, but they present massive strategic opportunities for liquidity management if you alter the model.
Right, like looking at the Iberian electricity market, or MIBEL. It links the Portuguese and Spanish grids, giving companies structural opportunities to strategize energy costs. The 2025 IRES report actually highlights a huge acceleration in self-consumption in Portugal, hitting 1.8 gigawatts by 2024.
Which fundamentally changes the cost structure of a heavy manufacturing business.
Exactly. Think about the chocolate factory example. They spent 2 million euros on a solar installation specifically to offset a 1.5 million euro annual energy bill. This is where technology and innovation fundamentally alter liquidity. You deploy capital expenditure up front to permanently slash a recurring operational expense. It repays itself and removes a massive variable from the cash flow equation.
However, the most dangerous costs to control are the ones a business cannot do without, which are usually dictated by external markets. That chocolate manufacturer is totally exposed to global cocoa prices, which swing based on weather and logistics. We see this in technology, too.
Yeah, broadcast tech companies facing electronic component bottlenecks.
Right. Companies like Ross Video, Vizardi, or WT Vision. To guarantee delivery, they are forced to build expensive backup inventory. The European Central Bank's 2026 SAFE survey found that 40% of euro area firms use external financing primarily just to fund inventories and working capital.
Which is a brutal paradox. Building resilience against supply chain shocks means you have to deploy cash exactly when cash is most scarce. You're draining your liquidity buffer just to survive a potential payment delay. Here's where it gets really interesting regarding the internal human dynamics of this. Structurally, collections must sit within the finance department. It has to be close to sales, but totally independent from it.
Because sales wants to hit quotas and finance needs the cash to make payroll. The conflict of interest is destructive.
Yeah, having no dedicated collections person or having them report to the sales director is a fatal organizational error. Take that Spanish family business case. 70% of their bad debt had been pre-identified as high risk by finance. The warnings were perfectly documented.
But the commercial function had the hierarchical power to override finance and force the sales through anyway, which is why separation is essential. Even a tiny business can have one person handle collections, one handle deposits, and one manage suppliers.
And that separation demands serious experience. We see aggressive entrepreneurs using newly formed shell companies just for fraudulent purchasing.
Right, they make massive initial orders on credit and vanish. An inexperienced collector sees a huge commercial opportunity and approves it. That's exactly why, in Spain, Sandro specifically hired seasoned professionals over 50 years old. They had the life experience to firmly resist aggressive pressure from the sales department.
So if sales disagrees with a credit freeze, the escalation has to go to the finance director, not the collections technician.
Exactly. It requires strong business leadership to protect financial technicians from commercial directors. And while the European Union's 2011 framework provides the right to claim statutory interest on late payments, relying on that is a failure of early intervention. You need working capital today, not a legal claim to interest 3 years from now.
Which leads perfectly into the absolute necessity of stress testing your liquidity before the pressure actually hits. Sandro's framework involves modeling a sudden 20% revenue loss.
But doesn't modeling a 20% overnight drop just induce a panic attack for the management team?
It feels like one, sure, but it forces vital decisions while you still have operational flexibility. It's exactly like a fire drill. You don't wait until the building is burning to figure out the emergency exits. You map the route while everyone is calm. If revenue drops 20% tomorrow, which specific costs get cut? Which borderline relationships do we drop? The BIS 2026 research on supply chain vulnerabilities proves this is necessary, because a payment delay from a major client has an immediate cascading effect.
And sometimes the best fire escape is just walking away from the revenue entirely? Back to that German customer pushing for 120-day terms. Sandro traveled there and threatened to close the entire German operation if those terms were enforced.
Wasn't he terrified they would just find a new supplier?
It was a calculated risk based on the psychology of firmness. He knew they didn't want the switching costs of validating a new supplier. By setting a hard boundary, the customer caved to 60 days within 15 days. Another example is a client who owed 240,000 euros. Sandro refused to supply a single new unit without a strict 12-month payment plan.
Wow. And that worked.
It resulted in 5 years of flawless payments. You can protect boundaries professionally without hostility.
But to get that level of control, collections has to start long before the invoice is overdue.
Yeah.
Sandro asks for 3 basic documents: the customer list, payment terms, and bad debt information. The thresholds are super practical. Beyond 75 days is an immediate red flag. Bad debt exceeding half a month's invoicing is amber. Beyond 1 month is red.
And observing the staff executing this is critical, right?
Totally. You can have a perfect written policy, but human behavior changes under pressure. Sandro observed a German employee executing a collections process flawlessly, but the written procedure she followed was fundamentally flawed and costing the company money. Tactically, a collector must never accept the phrase, "I will pay." They have to ask, when? Establishing a specific calendar date creates human accountability.
This raises an important question about how corporate culture influences these financial metrics. Sandro noted stark cultural differences. Managers in Portugal, the Netherlands, and Africa approach collections very differently from those in England.
Right, you can't fix a cultural aversion to asking for money just by handing out a new manual.
No, you have to align the incentives. Creating a variable compensation allowance tied directly to recovery performance changes daily behavior. At the multinational level, they gamified collections across Europe with a CRM competition. It gave clear objectives, daily visibility, and financial rewards. The hesitation to make the difficult phone call vanished when it became a rewarded metric.
Yet in family businesses, the owner themselves is frequently the biggest obstacle to collection. The intimacy that wins the business initially becomes a massive liability when invoices go unpaid. The owner isn't negotiating with an account, they're negotiating with a friend.
So how do you solve that without ruining the relationship?
You create deliberate structural distance. The collections employee acts as a professional shield. The owner can listen to complaints socially, but they must refuse to reverse finance's decisions. And language matters. Don't tell the client the bank is forcing your hand. Cite strict internal company policy. That preserves negotiating power while keeping professional boundaries.
Turning all this into a measurable management function is the ultimate goal. Sandro Consulting model relies on analyzing data, observing staff, and doing short 2 to 3 day interventions. Measurement dictates strategy. If you target 50 out of 200 bad accounts, tracking the 50 successes isn't enough. You have to track exactly why the other 150 failed.
Was it a liquidity issue? A disputed invoice? Weak internal follow-up?
Exactly. Data transforms collections from a series of stressful arguments into strategic management information. When deciding between internal collections and outsourcing, you're just trading the speed of an internal team against the financial discount of selling the debt. And the urgency is real. The OECD's 2026 assessment on Portugal showed late payments to SMEs increased by 11.8% in 2024.
Which brings us to the core realization. The real management question is not when you pay, but how the business finances the gap in between. The idea that you can perfectly match 30-day supplier terms with 30-day customer terms is a dangerous myth. Look at the cocoa market. It requires upfront payment at the port, creating an immediate structural gap.
And then inventory creates what Sandro calls the cost of context. Storage, refrigeration, obsolescence, it all consumes liquidity constantly.
I remember the example of the rare materials from China. A company bought an extra ton because the market price dipped, thinking it was a bargain.
But they lost the material entirely because they lacked the proper storage space to maintain it.
It's the ultimate financial trap. Chasing a unit cost bargain without calculating the operational holding costs will destroy your liquidity.
This is the exact liquidity discipline that separates resilient companies from fragile ones. The downward spiral is predictable. You get a large customer, terms extend, collections soften, cash tightens, and operational options vanish. Sandra's ultimate checklist demands management know who owes money, when they pay, where the greatest exposure is, and where true negotiating power exists. The OECD 2022 Principles on SME Financing and the 2026 Scoreboard both reinforce this. Financing conditions dictate survival.
Liquidity isn't just a finance problem. It is the mathematical result of every single commercial promise and delay made across the company.
It requires managing the conditions of cash, not just monitoring the balance.
Let's review the essential reading list for this episode. First up, the AICP Portugal Global Mandate. This is really a must-read if you're an SME looking to internationalize. Since we talk so much about customer concentration today, expanding across borders is one of the best ways to dilute that risk, and this document provides the exact market intelligence you need to do that safely.
Next is the 2026 research by Banerjee and colleagues from the Bank for International Settlements. This paper offers a brilliant look into the elasticity of money within interconnected supply networks. It clearly demonstrates why companies operating in complex production chains need significantly higher working capital just to survive sudden market shocks.
We also reference DGEG, specifically regarding the Iberian electricity market, or MyBel. Understanding this integrated market context is absolutely vital for industrial companies. It shows how strategic energy planning across connected regional grids can fundamentally alter your baseline operational cost structure.
Connecting directly to that energy theme is the RC 2025 report. It details the rapid acceleration of electricity self-consumption in Portugal, highlighting how investments in solar capacity are transitioning from basic sustainability initiatives into vital, high-return liquidity strategies for manufacturers.
Then we have the European Central Bank's 2026 SAFE survey. This is an eye-opening look at real corporate finance, revealing that a staggering 40% of euro area firms are heavily reliant on external financing strictly to cover basic inventories and working capital.
For regulatory context, the European Parliament 2011 Directive on Late Payments is foundational. It established the baseline 60-day rule for B2B transactions. It is essential reading for understanding creditor rights and the legal mechanisms available before a cash gap turns into a full-blown crisis.
I also highly recommend the OECD 2022 High-Level Principles. It offers a comprehensive, practical framework for SME financing resilience, detailing exactly how smaller organizations can diversify their funding sources to withstand macroeconomic pressures without over-leveraging.
Finally, the OECD 2026 Scoreboard for Portugal. This provides the hard data on rising payment delays for SMEs. It proves with numbers that sluggish credit growth and extended payment terms are systemic threats to business survival, not just anecdotal complaints from finance directors.
About the author, Pedro Eloy is an international executive specializing in enterprise growth through business performance, revenue optimization, digital transformation, and strategic market expansion. With more than 25 years of leadership experience across Asia, Europe, and the Americas, Pedro has held executive and advisory roles in multinational organizations, including Levin Fung and AOL Turner, as well as high-growth ventures such as GH Software, acquired by IBM, and MuniV.TV, acquired by Viodone. In the public sector and academia, Pedro served as Executive Council member and Chairman of the United Nations ESBN, yet leading business initiatives across 61 Asia-Pacific economies, contributed to ICC International Chambers of Commerce Digital Transformation as a senior executive, and taught as Associate MBA Professor in Entrepreneurship at the University of Hong Kong, ranked #1 Asia-Pacific MBA program by The Economist for 9 consecutive years.
About Business Master Series, Behind the Decisions That Shape Successful Companies. Produced by Pedro Eloy and Xinshin Ma, Business Master Series examines the strategic frameworks, critical decisions, inflection points, and leadership choices that shape high-performing organizations. Drawing on insights from CEOs, founders, senior executives, innovators, and industry experts, combined with rigorous analysis of industries, markets, and business models, the series provides practical perspectives on the strategies, operating models, and management decisions that drive sustained competitive advantage across sectors, including technology, manufacturing, textiles, and sports.
We would like to thank you for listening to this episode of Business Masters and trust this conversation provided valuable insights and perspectives that can help shape strategic thinking and decision-making within your organization. We look forward to welcoming you back for future episodes where we will continue sharing impactful analyses and hosting thought-provoking conversations that explore the ideas shaping the future of business, technology, and innovation.
We would like to leave you with a question. When your most lucrative customer asks to extend their payment terms by 30 days, are you funding your own growth, or are you quietly financing theirs at the risk of your own survival?
Before you go, if you enjoyed this episode and would like to listen to future episodes, please remember to subscribe. Business Masters, Behind the Decisions That Shape Successful Companies, a program produced by Pedro Eloy and Xinshin Ma. Each conversation is paired with rigorous industry, market, and business model analysis, providing practical perspectives on the strategic and managerial choices that drive long-term performance across sectors, including technology, manufacturing, textiles, and sports.